Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today for our 553rd New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, the Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Shahar Kramer, Camilo Otero, Mindy Seu, Anthony, Tino, and Megan and Liberty. We're thrilled to welcome poet Michael Cavuto here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a working document of resources and actions. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and thoughtful social and political meditations in our monthly publication and in our public events, like here in our daily NSC. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support our writers, editors, and operations here at the Rail. And now to introduce today's guests. Shahar Kramer is a social sculptor, curator, and works as the art editor for Granta Hebrew. Her work has been featured in various exhibitions and publications, including Granta and Portfolio. She is the co-founder and curator of The Empty Space and is the recipient of the MACAA Student Award. Camilo Otero is the artist programs manager at the Center for Book Arts. Otero has been deeply involved with the artist book scene in Spain and Colombia for the last decade, curating exhibitions, organizing artist residencies, and publishing artist books. He is the co-founder of Calypso Press based in Cali, Colombia. Anthony Tino is a creative producer, curator, and co-founder of platforms such as Endless Editions and Fully Booked. Tino previously co-edited the Fully Booked Dubai Art Book Fair, which primarily focused on highlighting works from the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia. Mindy Seu is a designer and researcher who, as a fellow at Harvard Law School, began this digital cyberfeminism index, which was later commissioned by Rhizome and presented at the New Museum. The printed publication Cyberfeminism Index is a 2021 recipient of the Graham Foundation grant and will be published in fall 2022. Arts writer, editor, and archivist Megan and Liberty is the art book section editor at the Rail and co-founder of Book Art Review. Her writing appears regularly on Hyperallergic and in Art Review and has also been published in Art Forum, Art in America, Frieze, and elsewhere. She is also an AICA USA and Creative Capital Warhol Foundation's arts writing workshop participant. And with all of that, I will turn it over to Camilo. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Hello, everyone. I'm Camilo Otero, and I'm really excited to be here today. I want to thank Brooklyn Rail for having us, and really excited as well to present this show by Anthony Tino and Shahar Kramer. And I'm going to start by introducing Center for Book Arts. I'm going to share my screen with you. So the Center for Book Arts is we're a nonprofit organization located in Manhattan. We've been around for over 50 years, uplifting and advocating for book arts and artist books. And our main mission is to provide artists with opportunities and support via access to specialized studio space and techniques. We were founded in 1974 by Richard Minsky, and he had in his vision, he wanted artists and bookmakers and bookbinders to get together to have a space to be able to develop and show their work. And we're continuing that vision by having three main programs, which are exhibitions, studio access, and education. I'm going to talk really briefly about each one of them. And so our educational program is focused mainly on book arts and bookmaking. And we have all sorts of workshops and classes, from weekend workshops to more in-depth certificate programs. And we, in the last couple of years, we've moved on to hybrid and online programming, hosting over 8,000 participants in the last 2 years. Another aspect is studio access. We provide access to a specialized studio with a print shop and a bindery to artists through studio rental, and also through artist residence program, where we host 6 to 10 artists every year, and we grant them 24/7 access to the studio workshop, and also tuition waiver in all of our educational programs. We also have an exhibitions program, which Beyond Codex is part of. We have 4 seasons of exhibitions, a group show every season, and 2 to 3 individual artist projects. And our main interest are exhibitions that continue or open conversations about the current status and the historical status of artist books. We also have a collection with over 6,000 titles, a fine art collection, and a reference library. Our reference library can be accessed through online through our website, and we also have it's open for in-person access. So we would like you to visit us. You can come and visit us Monday through Saturday from 11 to 6. And right now we have Beyond Codex, which we'll be talking about with the curators and artists today. We also have Resistant Systems, which is an exhibition by Tim Schwartz around security systems, cybersecurity systems, but also ancient techniques of security. We have a retrospective of Candor Arts, publishing studio in Chicago that operated between 2015 and 2021. And Vera Icon, an exhibition by Veronica Shapers around the topic of conspiracy theories around coronavirus. Last but not least, I would like to invite you to our Benefit with Friends. This is our annual gathering, and it will be a party next Friday, 13th, at Center for Book Arts. So I hope to see you there very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Are we switching over to our primary slideshow? Great. Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation, Camilo. It was so great to introduce CBA to some of the Rails dedicated viewers and readers. And I sort of love that we started the presentation with a little bit of history about CBA, because founded in 1974, like you said, it's one of the oldest book arts organizations in the US. And so thinking about how institutional archives are kept as well, and how the history of CBA is sort of stored and preserved, is a nice way to kind of open this conversation about archives and the way in which we can use them as material and research with them. So a little bit about me and why I'm especially excited to talk about this today with you guys is that I actually was an archivist early on in my career for many years in an artist studio. And then I taught workshops to emerging and mid-career artists about how they can self-archive. So my perspective to archives at that time was really about the importance of building and storing your own narratives and keeping your own histories so that you could be able to share them the way that you wanted them to be told as an artist and as a creative professional. And now as a writer, an editor, and a curator, I'm thinking a lot more about using archives, how we access them, how they function as places to both store and preserve information, but also how they can kind of hinder that access sometimes. Who gets to use an archive? Who gets to research an archive? So these are a lot of the things that I'm thinking about. And it just goes to show that there's so many entrees into thinking about archives conceptually and materially. In this exhibition, Anthony and Shahar, who curated, I'm really excited to talk to you guys about it, you touch on some of these issues. But your approach is a bit more focused on how archives can preserve certain cultural histories and also disrupt predominant narratives about cultures that don't suit the people whose histories are being kept. For example, Western or colonialist narratives being imposed onto other cultures. So when I visited the exhibition, I pulled out a few things from the wall text that introduce how you're thinking about an archive. So I'm just going to read a few of these. Archiving as a method to reimagine the potential of publishing. Artist as researcher. Archives thinking about as a beginning rather than an end. The living archive extends the notion of its application beyond a preservational position, rethinking the power structures of the archival system. And so the final question that Shahar asks in her catalog essay is, could the artists and archives be both an act of internal institutionalization and an act of external resistance? So I just hope that we can all keep this question in mind as we talk today, because it really stuck with me. And then I reread that catalog again and thought again about artist practices as how they can do both these things in really productive ways. So as an exhibition devoted to archives, I thought it makes the most sense to start our conversation with what will live beyond the physical exhibition, which is the catalog. And so an exhibition about living archives is very interested in how it in itself will be archived. And the catalog design and structure is extremely unique. So I would really love for you guys to just show some of your thinking around that. It was inspired by the Jewish Talmud text. So I'd love it if you guys could talk through that process and explain the design for the viewers here.
Yeah. So the Talmud book is like a really special book. I almost think that a book is not really a good word to define it. I really think it's beyond codex. It's like more like a project. Its formulation was like centuries long, and it's based on continuous, okay, I'll start from the beginning. It's really complicated and vast, so I don't know from what angle to start explaining it, but the oral tradition, the oral Jewish tradition, was written down as the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the heart of the text. You can see the first slides. Yeah, that's the Mishnah. And then here we are. Yeah, and I'm again, there's people that devote their life to studying the Talmud. So for instance, Shlomo Naeda was really kind to speak with us and make some of the concept more clear. He's a Talmud researcher and scholar at the University of Jerusalem. So the Talmud starts with the Mishnah, which is like kind of the oral tradition, the oral Jewish tradition, how to practice Judaism, for it not to get lost, like to archive it because it was an oral tradition. And then on that, the commentary and the discussions over the meanings and the different like philosophical aspects, mathematical aspects, that all build up to formulate this book of the Talmud that is structured with building blocks. And yeah, it's a formulation of conversation and participation of different rabbis, different people responding to the Mishnah, responding to the Talmud book, and then the Talmud book absorbs that commentary into itself and is reprinted and reprinted and reprinted, and is really like an ecosystem and like kind of organic project. Do you want to maybe pass to show the layout, maybe another one?
Yeah.
So as you can see, so the middle one is what you saw before. That's the Mishnah. That's kind of the heart of it. That's the what everything is kind of responding and building from. It's like the root. And then all of these blocks are discussions of people commenting over the discussion. And it's really, really vast. There's like everything in there. There's math, there's philosophy, there's just more practical things. And there's like a word to describe it in Hebrew, yam, which is like a sea, like an ocean. So in a way, I think you can kind of think of it almost as vast as the internet. You can really find everything there. You can ask a question and you will find like some direction in there, and there will be multiple perspectives, multiple angles, multiple people talking. It does have this like indexy almost feel to it. Yeah, I think we were very interested in this as a reference to the living archive because I mean, it has a lot of, it has so much aspects to it, but I think the participation of the reader in the formation of it is something really unique. And talking about participation, I think that's a huge element in archive, in building an archive is, again, questions of access, but also like questions of who gets to so the fact that this is like kind of a collaborative and kind of a conversation is really unique.
And I think in this image, just for most of our viewers who haven't seen the catalog, you can see the different sections are kind of chopped up and wrap around each other. It's not a left to right direct reading. So when you actually look at the catalog for the exhibition, it follows this sort of format with central text that's about the specific artworks. And then on the left and right are each curator's essay moving in parallel columns throughout the text with various commentary, footnotes, asides by the other contributors.
I think another, I like the non-linear is like a really big part of the, there's no really point where it starts and ends, not in the Talmud, and we try to kind of mimic that in the catalog.
And you brought up, oh, go ahead, Anthony.
Well, you know, one of the things about sort of accessing information from the Talmud, which is interesting, just from thinking and you know, from an archival point of view, is that it's not indexical in the sense that it's page 1 is math, you know, page 80 is legal structures. It's much more associative, and in that sense, it does require input of the reader to actually learn how to access the knowledge of it. So aside from it being something that is a store of knowledge, it also sort of has its own rules of engagement, which we also thought was kind of interesting, in the sense that, you know, it seems like an interesting contemporary metaphor to something like the librarian call card, or something, you know, the ways in which institutions categorize books, which artists have responded to, especially in sort of like the postcard movement of like the 70s and 80s. You know, in a way, it requires much more interaction, and I thought that felt, you know, like part of the ethos of the show is about it being actually very personal and being very, you you know, a lot of the works have to do with personal experiences, family histories, things that resonate with people on almost a spiritual level. And I think sort of after, you know, several years of you know, people grappling with kind of online spaces because of the pandemic, it did feel sort of like a nice kind of timely way in which to think about kind of feeling and emotion. So it's sort of, yeah, it's sort of a way of like accessing knowledge through an emotional, you know, an emotional and interpretive method.
I think it's interesting that you also mentioned rules of engagement, because I think that's something else that a lot of the works in the exhibition and this catalog are playing with. The idea that an exhibition catalog is a format and a structure that most people understand the rules of engagement for. It documents the exhibition. So when I open it up, I expect to see a checklist and a curatorial essay and then images of the works in the show, right? But your exhibition really, and the artist's works in the show really play with our expected rules of engagement for archives, for personal histories, cultural histories, institutional histories. And then even in the catalog, the reader experience, when I was looking at it at first, I kind of thought, what am I even reading? I couldn't find the intro essay. There was no intro essay. And I'm flipping through the images and they're disrupting the text. It's hard to navigate. And it took me a while to learn the rules of engagement for the catalog. And I felt like that was a very purposeful discomfort with what structure I was expecting and familiar with.
I think also like just the title of the show, like Beyond Codex and Living Archive, for me, like thinking of archives, it has this connotation of almost like a grave, you know, that you put there, you put it down in the basement, and like to think about the living archive, what does it mean to like flip that, to bring it up to the living, to have it like a dynamic and evolving body? What does it mean to have like an archival body that is within the living? So participation is really important in that, and I think that we kind of wish that the reader will have to kind of engage with the catalog, with the show, in order to like access it in a way. It requires him to bring himself or her or them to bring themselves to the material.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to just show a quick installation image, if there is one available on the slideshow of the show, so people have a visual of the kind of structure of the exhibition space. One thing, sorry?
The install shots are slides 38 and onward.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that cue. You already mentioned, Anthony, some of the themes of the show, but I wanted to slow down a little bit and just ask, what was the actual design process? Because it's designed by one of the artists who is also in the show. What was that kind of collaboration like? How did you invite artists to add in little bits of commentary? How did you come up with how it would actually go together?
Sure. So the space itself was really designed by Shahar and myself, but you know, through kind of discussions with artists. The catalog with Minna Shoeb was a longer process where we again had, you know, several meetings with people who were kind of Talmudic experts, and also a very cool you know, art appreciator rabbi in New York named Rabbi Frank Tamburello, who sort of, you know, who is not so much a Talmudic expert, but kind of enlightened us into the, you know, the elements of the philosophy behind it that could inform the show. And I do think that, you know, Shahar's practice is kind of rooted in being an artist. So I think being in the space and, you know, seeing how things interact with each other were really important. For example, you know, the Betsy Damon installation was, you know, a lot of kind of moving back and forward with Betsy's studio.
In the image that's in the back left, right? Just for
yes, and I think there might be some.
Yeah,
exactly. And this is kind of from her archive. And I think Betsy Damon's a very important artist to discuss in the formation of the concept of the show, because I do feel like, you know, for some reason, Betsy Damon's work really resonated with me to show in Center for Book Arts. And there are small books that she's produced for performances, and in a way kind of resonate with this idea of like early conceptual art and its relationship to book arts. But the work is actually quite metaphysical. And I think that, Beyond Codex in the title kind of refers to the metaphysical nature of a book, in that it's, you know, it's not something that's just kind of like bound within the container of a codex structure. And, you know, I'm actually reading this really interesting book right now called Binding Space by Marian Mackin, who's a professor in New Zealand. And she talks a lot about sort of the idea of binding as being something that brings ideas together, and thinking about kind of book concepts architecturally outside of just thinking about like a spine. So I think Betsy's like what is inherent to Betsy's work, which is kind of metaphysical to begin with, you know, Shrine for Every Woman, Meditations with Stones, these eco works that happened in Lhasa and Chengdu in the the early to mid 90s, which were very transient and very metaphysical to begin with, I think really inspired the kind of ethos of the show in a way. And, you know, for other artworks, it also just became a matter of, you know, thinking about the ways in which we could sort of breathe new life within them. So, you know, there was an instance where we did a type commission with an artist from the Philippines that kind of breathed some life into the Filipino folk foundry. But yeah, I guess we could speak on specifics in a bit. Yeah, if you have other questions about that.
Yeah. And so transitioning from the kind of process of the catalog as a way that the show will live on, we've been seeing installation images of the design and exhibition layout. One thing that I thought was really interesting after spending time in the space and then looking at the catalog and then thinking about the space again is kind of what you're describing, a way of rethinking the experience of materials, bound, unbound. How do we make these archives alive, and formats of the archive and codex that are not actual codexes? I know that Mindy Seu is also joining us today. And so it was interesting to enter a space thinking I knew what an archive looked like, and then being encountered with these very different forms in very different presentation. So you can see here, some things are closed in vitrines, but then there was also the computer set up with the printer and everything for you to access the cyber feminism index. And then there's a reference library, there's works resting on the floor, there's works hung on the wall, there's framed, unframed works. So really thinking about these different encounters with archives and the different ways they manifest beyond what we expect and beyond the rules of engagement that we are trained to think about for working with archives.
Right.
And I think that really fits kind of what you set forth in your intro text about the artist as researcher, and how the approach of an artist to the material of the archive can be so different, especially as you already mentioned, Anthony, one of the themes that comes out when the material is personal, when it's your own history or your family history, which a number of the works in the show specifically deal with those kinds of histories.
Yeah, and I think you know, Mindy's work is a great example of that too, in sort of straddling the kind of two ideas of the kind of the metaphysics of codex, right, and thinking that, you know, if conceptually, like the page can be thought of as a screen or a website, and then the fact that the work is continuously evolving is really interesting, and it might be a good time to maybe look at some of Cyberfeminism Index.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah, while we switch presentations, or if you have images, I just wanted to draw again the connection. Shahar, when you were speaking earlier about the Talmud, you raised the internet. And again, this idea of non-linearity, when we go beyond the codex, what does that also open up in terms of our now the way we navigate things on the internet is very outside of time. It's very nonlinear. It's very a different temporal experience. How do we then think about archives in that way, shifting these pieces around? And I think that's a nice segue.
Yeah.
But Mindy, if you want to talk about your piece.
Yeah, I mean, very much connected to that, Ted Nelson, who's the father of the concept of hypertext and hyperlinks, often talks about how the Talmud was one of his primary references for the creation of two-way links for his proto-internet before the World Wide Web. So it's definitely this entangled, non-linear, cross-referential system. I'm just going to quickly share my screen to give you some visuals for the Cyberfem Index. So the Cyberfeminism Index, as mentioned, is incomplete and always in progress. It attempts to revise internet history, and it really showcases radical online activism and net art from 1991 to present. It's also very much a project of translation. So the body of content that you see in this online index has been translated from a spreadsheet into a draft catalog and then into a printed catalog that you'll see a glimpse of at the end of this very short slideshow. So perhaps the first is the website. So you are greeted by this green glow and what snaps to be a very standard table, but it's made to appear unusual in certain ways, kind of adopting these default HTML elements. This digital index was really designed with two primary questions in mind. How do websites age, and how can we visualize citations? And as you click each of the entries, these drawers would open with more information, and it's added to this side panel to kind of build this learning trail or associative links. And then at the bottom of this, you'd be able to download or view the downloads of other people and basically create readers of your own, whether built off of intuition or intent. So the second, or one of the containers also was the draft catalog. So for this, I was doing performative readings with an overhead camera. This was at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and this one was at Radical Networks at Prime Produce. And for this newest version, we're actually thinking about how we can build in an AR component to this overhead camera. So a lot of the things in the book, as you might imagine, are living. They're interactive websites, they're film stills, they're things that are constantly in motion, but they're really created static in this book. So we're developing some sort of application where when hovering over a page, you can basically see it moving as if you might when you were on the screen. So this is the forthcoming publication in October 2022, so a few months from now. It was designed by a good friend of mine, Laura Combs, and it's coming out with Inventory Press, hopefully around the time of the New York Art Book Fair. I kind of breezed through that, but I'm hoping it'll give us some grounding so we can chat more.
Yeah, that's great.
And I love how Inventory Press actually, I think it's such an appropriate press to be working with. They had a book called Bio several years ago that was a repository of like Twitter bios, which is the only thing that's not actually archived on Twitter. So yeah, that's a really interesting press to be working with.
The artist who did that was Mona something, right? I had that book, and it's like a big, thick, like
yeah.
chunk. Yeah, Inventory Press does a lot of really great books thinking about publishing and archives as well. So that's very exciting, Mindy.
It's Maria Mona Lisa Garavi.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then a few things just to give more context on your work from the catalog. I just pulled out a few quotes from, I think, your essay, Anthony, about Mindy's work. It's about the diffusion of feminism through technology. And it's a critique of cyber babes and fembots that stalked the sci-fi landscapes of the 1980s. So I loved those points of thinking about it, about the work.
Yeah, and that is a citation from Mindy's website.
Oh, great.
Yeah, exactly.
So you said that, perfect.
Exactly.
When cyber,
go ahead.
was first coined by William Gibson in Neuromancer, the science fiction novel. It was very much characterized by this space and feels so relevant to this conversation around metaverse right now, like sensory networked online environments. But as you're describing, was also characterized very much by the male gaze or like two-dimensional female figures. So cyberfeminism was actually a provocation to changing what this cyberspace might look like. So really trying to break apart that word itself.
And it seems like both a microcosm and a macrocosm of the same conversation we're sort of having about archives more broadly, about changing the landscape, about shifting things, about breaking a binary and finding something else in between or of a piece of it. Another work that I thought used technology and the internet and kind of spoke to this idea that you both cite in the catalog of the archive as an ecosystem was Liliana Faber's work. And that's kind of the accordion book that you saw in the central installation images. That's one of the first works that kind of stands out in the show and takes up a kind of sculptural space in the exhibition space. I wonder if either of you wanted to talk at all about that, or Mindy even,
Sure, Shahar, do you want to introduce that? And
yeah, sure. So
images of it.
Yeah, Liliana's, this is a book actually that we did for the show with Liliana, so it's also unique in that sense. We have some pictures of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the install shots are nice, but I also included some in progress images. But this was the first time it was shown as a kind of accordion book. Previously, it had been shown as just sort of like a series of images, and also sort of exists on her website. Yeah.
I mean, just to take it, let's see. So I was also just really interested in working with maps in regards to archives. And then her project is like this.
Do you know what number slide it is?
Yeah, actually that 145 looks good.
Yeah.
So as you can see, these are like satellite-like images of Google Earth, of islands that appeared in maps but were proven not to exist. I think maps also just generally in the context of archives is a really interesting idea to mix in. But I mean, and in the back, I don't know if we have a picture of the back side of this. There's the text. Yeah. But yeah, I also think about Résumé a lot in context of the catalog and maps, on how like when it's non-linear, you can't really point on any specific point and be like, this is where it starts and this is where it ends. And just this archive of non-existent islands and that kind of relationship between the, how do you say this in English? I forget the word.
It's sort of an archive of untruth in a way. In the sense that these are land masses that have been removed from the map, but then they're also sort of AI generated to look as if you're looking at them from Google Earth.
I think that the word I'm looking for is like these AI like images and their kind of relationship with reality. Like we take that kind of road. This is an image of something that exists, and we take that as evidence, and we rely on these like kind of visual information. And I think it's really interesting how she kind of shows that relationship between these AI kind of artifacts and reality, and how that relationship is not as direct to one another.
Another quote I pulled from the catalog about this work, the artwork reflects the way archives, personal or institutional, are created and accessed in internet times as an accumulation of data ordered by different parameters other than their temporal creation, thinking again about these nonlinear things you're talking about. But also, I love that idea that you guys raised in the catalog of non-truths, of untruths, and what we do with archives, as information shifts and changes, what we do with facts that are proven to not be facts and histories that are actually not true, where is that information stored? How do we catalog that? How do we think about an untruth or whose truth it is? And kind of like, I think you may have already said this, Shahar, the text on the backside are about colonial discoveries of perceived discoveries of new lands, which obviously already had people living on them and had been discovered already. So again, that's sort of one example of a sort of untruth. You know, you think you've discovered a land, but what does that mean?
Liliana's practice has other works that address this like territorial idea, and again, one of the things we're kind of thinking towards is kind of like books and their relationship to space or architecture, territory. And I think what's really interesting about Liliana's research too is looking at sort of what power dynamics are at play by nation states or colonial powers claiming territories on a map. So, it creates whole, parts of oceans or seas that then are kind of territory of the British Empire or, or the Portuguese or something like that. And what's really interesting is that there's some of these, some of her other works sort of address the legal definition of what constitutes an island, as opposed to just being like a rock formation, and the discrepancies between the laws that have been established in sort of like international treaties and that predated those in specific countries. For example, I think and I could be misquoting this, I know that the Scotland one is accurate, but I believe that the English, it was that two people had to be, an island was defined by sustaining two people's lives for 40 days. And the Scottish, it was that it had to sustain two sheep's lives for 40 days. So it's this kind of like really interesting like difference in like priorities and that, yeah, exactly, that I think is embedded in this work and in the rest of her practice. So we've been really interested in kind of what she's up to.
Yeah, and similar to what you were describing as well, Mindy, this idea that it's not finished, it's not fixed, it's always changing. The same way that these kind of images have been sort of AI generated, these landscapes are always changing in reality, and also our representations of them are constantly unfixed. Borders we think of as being these fixed parameters, but they're not really fixed. Again, thinking outside of a codex binded structure, as you were saying, Shahar, with maps as being such an interesting way to think through archives as well, cartography and land drawing, all of that history as well.
I also think that the Liliana's work, I mean, generally, like as the curatorial like approach to this, there's a lot of also like archives that are in communication with each other. So I see a direct communication between Liliana's work and the incomplete Tombu. Like this one is something that was registered, was proven not to exist, versus something that was never registered, that was never archived properly, that was never documented. And this is an attempt to kind of like put it down on paper and writing down from memory.
Should we show that work?
Yeah, we have a lot of
slide 13 through 16.
Great.
Yeah.
I think also collaboration within archives is also in Gravitas, Mary Von Hale and Irma Kanevi. But let's do this first. I'm jumping ahead of myself.
I mean, the works are all so interconnected. Even when I was trying to think about how to order discussions with the two of you, I mean, they are so different when you walk into the exhibition space, but the themes and conceptual framing behind all of them are really enmeshed.
Yeah, thank you. I agree that I think that this is the flip side of the coin of what Liliana is working with, where, you know, this work was created by a Sri Lankan artist, Tisha Nathanan, and it's non-exhaustive because obviously it doesn't account for everyone that has been displaced, but is about Tamil-speaking people who were displaced during the Sri Lankan Civil War, which has current day ramifications, and this is sort of drawing, drawing the homes that they had left, floor plans quite intricately, and they're overlaid with kind of more specific architectural drawings. But the name, the Tombu, comes from a registry, a land registry, which was a remnant of the Dutch in Sri Lanka. And it's just this kind of beautiful way of, using that format to think about like what a land registry could mean for someone on a more personal basis. Again, I keep coming back to this idea of kind of like the metaphysical, but I think that that's very much part of this book, is kind of like this, the idea of displacement, and this Tombu kind of being an outcrop of some bigger thing that's happened.
Yeah, and it relates to, again, playing with these notions that the rules of engagement that we have for certain types of institutional structures and how they can be transformed to different ends, or made to do different things, made to record different histories. In the catalog, you talk about this work also including memories, sort of, rather than just the people displaced and physical land, a kind of archive of displaced memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. I think this work also relates to, it's funny because like I mentioned the associative qualities of the Talmud before, and in a way I think the show becomes associative. To me, this book actually really resonates with the Michael Rakowitz work, in the sense that, we're drawing on kind of this historical memory of cuisine, right? And kind of the kitchen as archive, the kind of migration of and displacement of, and also just the kind of lack of acknowledgement of, Jewish Iraqis or Jews of the Arab world, is a very central theme to that. And kind of thinking about like what memories and stores of knowledge can be, can be brought forward through the preservation of cooking, but also in, as it being sort of a cookbook, which takes on this kind of commercial format, this kind of mass appeal, like catalyst of people then carrying this on through in their own kitchens, which relates to a public work of his. I don't know if we can bring up those slides, but that is, those are slides 7 through 10.
And I just wanted to jump in. This work I found really interesting because in so many ways, while the tension in the exhibition between institutional and personal histories is there, and the way we both contribute to and withhold from these institutional histories, this work felt really inviting as a viewer, because many of us have family recipes, and food is such a personal and specific thing for all of us. And we all engage in cooking and these kind of family traditions and personal traditions and have our own takes on recipes. So the idea of, in the catalog, you describe this process of thinking about food as a language, a lost language, as some of these ingredients become unavailable. And that, I think, is really something that many viewers to the exhibition can identify with and consider in their own lives.
Yes, we are also working. I mean, I cannot agree with you more. I think that like the more I worked on this show, the more I think that the kitchen is like the epitome of the living archive, because it is such an archival space, with oral tradition passing down there, and the cookbooks, and like I'm really interested in this idea of the kitchen as an archive. And we're working with Red Flower Collective actually to possibly do like they're also interested in food, and they use like the kitchen as a medium for like kind of socially engaging practice.
And they're residents at Center for, or one of them is a resident at Center for Book Arts.
Yeah, so Sohil Bhatia is a resident, and then it's Aaron Montanez. They're like a collaborative duo. Yeah, and I had such an interesting like meeting with them just the other day about their take on the archive in the kitchen, and it's a really I think it's just the epitome of like living archives, the kitchen. And every time we go into the kitchen, you know, it's like your mother is in your head and her mother is in her head and maybe her uncle and that recipe, and it's all like a big archive that transcends into food.
I think there's something, just to jump back sort of more directly into the work, there's something really powerful about the idea of dates for Iraqis, where, you know, it was the second largest source of the Iraqi economy, which Michael, you know, talks a lot about through several of his works. It, you know, being kind of the you know, the main export of Iraq essentially for years, and this proverb, "A house with a date palm will never starve," being kind of in the imagination of the Arab world. And so a lot of his sculptures are kind of created with these date syrup cans, but also in a way, I'm not sure exactly how directly he addresses this, but if you think like you can't ship dates from Iraq to the United States, but you could put a date can in an Iraqi, in an artist publication, and then it kind of circumvents that in a way. But this, you know, his Lamassu that he had as part of the Fourth Plinth program, which is a program of the Mayor of London in front of the National Gallery, which was the image we saw before. That sculpture is, you know, a Lamassu that was destroyed very recently by ISIS, but had been in Iraq for thousands of years, and it's constructed out of date cans as well. So this publication, you know, I think in one of the dinners that he had, which is the video in the exhibition, he says, you know, you're eating a dying language off the plate of a ghost. And I think in a lot of ways that idea is really kind of permeates a lot of his work. And, you know, so we're fans of his practice overall. And it was just amazing to see this, you know, this small publication kind of be like a way to transmit these big ideas through a more intimate setting. And, you know, he does dinners as well. You know, which the Dar El Sol project was a restaurant in Dubai. It was a pop-up, and it was really kind of a unique chance for people to also think about what does Jewish Iraqi culture and heritage look like. So yeah, this was a very important work for the show, and we were glad to be able to get copies that were also for sale too. So I think, you know, it's one of the books in the show that I think really break from the Livre Artiste kind of like, you know, special handmade. This is really something that's commercial, that's sort of like in the ethos of kind of original artist books, you know, or, you know, as would be described in the kind of like 1960s, 1970s sense.
Yeah, I feel like everything you mentioned just now encapsulates so many of the other themes. I mean, you mentioned the dinners, which makes me think about the intimacy of collaboration, but also a sort of collecting. When you talk about the artist as researcher, it's also an idea of collecting these histories and stories. So you share stories over a dinner and you eat food together. And it's another way of building an archive in a sense. So that's really interesting and speaks to a lot of the larger themes of the exhibition as well. I know that we are heading towards our Q&A. So before we get to the Q&A, I wanted to come back to this question that I asked at the beginning and that you asked, Shahar, in your essay, and just think about it now that we've all talked about some of the specific works and looked at them together. This idea, could the artist's archives be both an act of internal institutionalization and an act of external resistance? And thinking about this real tension between preservation and disruption of the archive in all these artists' works, and thinking through this living archive as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And Hebrew, publication, we say to bring to light. And I think that really has a modality between that tension, because it's both to disrupt and to put up front.
And Geniza is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Geniza is the funeral of a book, to
Exactly.
remove the light. So I think this kind of like Mobius strip of bringing to light and funeral is really interesting.
Yeah. And Mindy, you are an artist whose practice is really rooted in research. So I'm sure you have some thoughts as well about the way research-based practice is always engaged in this tension between sort of preservation and disruption, especially when it comes to archival material and living archives.
Yeah, and I think to your question earlier about whether an artist can participate both within an institution and external to it, two quotes come to mind. One I refer to a lot. Michael Warner, Publics and Counterpublics, says something along the lines of a publication is a site where a public is formed. So yes, it's a corpus and it's a codex, but it's really thinking about how these things kind of create a world and then moves outward and gathers people around it. And the other thing is, when I was creating this project, Judy Malloy, who's an early net artist, said that you always have to combine yak and hack. And yak was basically theory, talking, yak, 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 whereas hack was practice. So I always think about this intertwining between the two things. And I think that it's kind of a mirror of this institutional interior, exterior that Shahar wrote about.
I love that yak and hack.
Yeah.
I feel like even as a critic and an editor and a curator, we're trying to find that balance between yak and hack,
Always, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess my last kind of point that I'd asked you about before our audience joined us, which is when you enter the actual exhibition space at CBA now, there are currently no labels for the works there. And I had asked you earlier if this was intentional or not, or a sign of the exhibition in progress, but it also felt fitting after reading the catalog. It fit the material in a lot of ways to give us an unexpected exhibition viewing experience that we had to learn new rules of engagement for.
Yeah, and I'm happy to kind of talk about this because we really did think that the catalog would not just be the interpretive tool, but would also become, a space for people to jot down notes or thoughts as they went through. So at some point, we're really fortunate that the show is up through the end of June. So at some point that catalog will be available to folks. But really, it is a books show in the end, and it we do want people to kind of engage with the works, and a lot of that information just requires digging a bit deeper. I think this was actually a piece I really wanted to talk about. I know we're sort of running out of time before the Q&A, but this was a way in which we kind of revitalized or worked with publishers who had documented the tradition of sign painting in the Philippines, specifically in the Metro Manila area, to create a new work. And we actually commissioned it for the show, printed it Riso, and worked with a really amazing local space in Manila called Quago, and worked with a local sign painter named Edwin Tayao, which we're just so happy to have his work included in the show, and really felt like a way to not just show this kind of, pseudo-scientific encyclopedia of Filipino sign painting, but to really use the exhibition as a way to facilitate the practice, which is its own sort of dying and underrepresented, underappreciated art form in the Philippines. So we have several pieces from Edwin that were made specifically for the show. So what he's actually writing there translates to, if a stone is thrown at you, respond with / throw back bread. And he also gave us a second one, which was the sort of pink on black that said, "There's no happiness on this earth that was not watered with tears," which is just incredibly poetic for, someone who really just kind of works on commission. This was his personal work that got to shine through in the show. So we're really happy to include this. And all the people involved with Hardworking, Good Looking, Clara, Christian, Czar, they were just like super supportive. Carlos as well. And really it was amazing that they kind of used this opportunity to think about the artists that had contributed to their publication, as opposed to using it as an opportunity for them to have another moment in the spotlight. Was really amazing. And this is sort of generating some buzz in the Filipino publishing sphere and media, which is really interesting, and kind of, I hope in some way revitalizing some small interests in the craft of sign painting. And right before these slides are just some images from the actual publication that we do have in the space, which I think, again, getting into the interpretation, it just requires time. I think, once you enter the space, once you kind of engage with this book, then this narrative becomes more apparent.
And one quick thing to note about at Center for Book Arts, in many of the exhibitions, you are actually able to handle some of the books, which is the case for this work and many of the works in this exhibition. So you actually can flip through them, engage with them, and have that more experience that has more depth.
Yes. Yeah, we unfortunately, like some of the very rare books we had to put behind glass, but we made as much available as possible.
Yeah. Should we transition to Q&A, Rail team?
Sure, great. Yeah, thank you all so much. It's been really fascinating. Let's see here. I'm just gonna pull up our first question. Will be coming from Buzz Spector. You should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, I'm unmuted, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So my question needs to be accompanied by a little bit of a statement, is about lines of force and how you differentiate the line of force in an archive from the line of force in a dictionary or encyclopedia. So I wrote about this subject when I was examining Diderot's Gesammeltwerke some years ago. And I had this to say: an archive is a repository of texts and or images organized around a given subject. The archive provides for a relation of general equivalence between its components and for a means of sorting through their accumulation. Unlike dictionaries or encyclopedias, which define words or ideas in relation to general linguistic or cultural models and whose cognitive force is directed centrifugally outward toward the margins of a discursive terrain, the force of the archive is centripetal, drawing in traces of its concern that coalesce to form clearer insights into the meaning of its subject. The archive shares this focus with the diary, whose text is a reiteration of experiences directed toward the future self of the diarist. But diaries turn every experience into a personal one, a matter of effect rather than intention. And it is the intentionality of the archive, its emergence after the fact, that redeems it from diaristic narcissism. This seems to relate at several levels to the discussion today and to the exhibit at CBA. And I was hoping a couple of panelists might consider this and talk about where it applies in the installation and in relation to, say, Michael Rakowitz or to other artists on view.
Interesting. Let's see where to start with that.
I'm sorry, I have a big appetite for this kind of conversation.
No, I love the text. I have some like hearing reading thing. If you can send that quote that you just read on the chat, so I can also read that.
Will do.
It will be really helpful for me specifically.
I'd be willing to send you a 1,500 word response.
No, this is a personal thing. I kind of need to see text to really comprehend it. But if I did understand what, I'm just gonna go for it because I don't know if I completely understood another way of saying. Yeah, I think it's important also to rethink just the experiment with archive. Like my whole like my personal drive and working with artists that work with archives, it's like kind of shaking up these very stiff ideas of what is an archive and trying to imagine them a little differently. But I do need to read this for a second again.
I'm typing away here.
Yeah, I mean, based on what you shared before, this sort of if I can reread
Sure.
the essence, absence as its core, while encyclopedias say are centrifugal, expanding ever outward to link more and more of in the world to its indexicality. I think, we address this a bit in some of the writing, but also in the thinking that, this show also, it's not, while it is like a full phrase, it also kind of feels like it's still branching outward, where we're hoping that this kind of like associative interpretation method kind of like links with more and more works. Even since the show's opened, we've thought about and are just kind of spotting new things that we sort of keep sort of relating. There's the I saw a small exhibition on a Syrian tape archive that was in London recently, and it's sort of the I think that living nature is, or at least the works in the show are about kind of their expansion and not their kind of being limited to categorization or being finite. There are things that spill over, and there's things that continue to resonate with new works, or there are works that now are taking on new meanings. I think in a way, not to go back to Betsy Damon again, but I think that her works really kind of just do have this this kind of like spiritual resonance that even as someone who doesn't consider himself spiritual at all, there's something that is kind of like deeply moving about them, thinking about in the context of myself and my life now, you know, in 2022. And these are transient works that happened in Tibet in 1994. So I think that Betsy Damon archive is kind of moving in that kind of expanding, ever outward direction.
And I think because we're having a bit of a semantic argument here, maybe if we distinguish between like institutional archives and grassroots archives, perhaps the method of curation or gatekeeping is quite different. But ultimately, it's a series of things gathered around a particular theme deemed valuable. But there's also an oath of maintenance required in all of these things. So I feel like as we talk about archives versus indexes versus repositories, I do wonder in some ways if the term archive itself has become quite conflated. And I do not have a background in archival science, but I guess Megan, you do. But I'm curious, like, what you think of this this expansion of the term. You did.
Got it. Yeah, it kind of feels a bit like what's happened to the word curation as well. You know, these terms that have become encapsulating to a wide range of practices. And in some ways, I think the way that archive has been expanded has provided for a lot of this fruitful tension that we're talking about right now. And the fact that, you know, archive, capital A, you know, the institutional archive is so problematic in so many ways, it kind of serves to be broken open in this way. But to archive, in a sense, the preservation and what was the phrase you just used, Mindy? Oath of, I loved it. What was it?
An oath of maintenance.
Oath of maintenance. Yeah, I think that's the aspect of archiving that is sort of lost in our current way we discuss it, that it does require maintenance. That's the whole idea of an archive. So when we think about personal archives, how does that shift? As you said, grassroots archives. When we break open the term archive beyond the institutional archive, what's the maintenance that's required? And then sometimes it's emotional labor and emotional maintenance versus physical and material maintenance.
I would also
terrific,
like,
Megan.
oh, sorry.
I was going to say this notion of maintenance is one about interrupting time. When I dealt earlier with this question of diaries, there's a chronology. Things always move in one direction. And you can go back using time as a kind of index. But a good archive is concerned with matters of simultaneity. It's concerned with distinctions that are both public and private. It is a way of moving a core subject to different points of view. So like those monks with the rakes at Ryoanji, an archive is tended like a Japanese garden. The pebbles are arranged according to shifts in the light.
I like that comparison of a archive to a garden.
I think we might have some other questions as well. I want to make sure we can hear some other voices.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question and all your answers. Next, we'd like to turn it to Catherine Watson. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Yeah, I just had a really basic question. It wasn't as philosophical, but I do like that this show seems to be about interacting with the archive and doing that in creative ways, like opening up more ways to interact with an archive so that it's really living and not just something that is unaccessed or unused. So I like that. When I saw the first image showing, well, not the first image, but one of the first images showing the central, the Mishnah central text with all of the various shapes. Thank you. I'm so sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
Talmud. Okay, yeah. That underneath those various pieces of text, I saw a text that I couldn't read because it was like covered over. And I was wondering if it's possible to when you're looking at the book, can you access that bottom layer of text, or is it covered?
Are you referring to the catalog or to the actual Talmud pictures that we showed?
I think it's the catalog. It has commentary
Yeah,
in an
all the
L
text
shape.
is accessible. All in the catalog, all of the text is visible and accessible to read.
So how do you get the bottom layer? You pull up the top
Maybe
layer?
we can pull up the
I have the catalog. I have the catalog up in a PDF format. Let me just screen share that for a second. So yeah, this is sort of the format that we took for. So the artwork would be kind of the Mishnah part of it. My essay would be on the left, Shahar's would be on the right. Okay. And then we would have about the artists, interventions from artists based on questions that we posed to them on the theme. And then also image references on the left.
Okay, so, I think it was probably a draft. Like it was probably where you were working out, because it was very like it looked.
Was it just a hand-drawn?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that was a sketch.
I see.
Yeah, an early sketch. This is what the what it will look like, and again, thinking about lots of open space, because in the evolution of the Talmud as well, things that were annotated on the corners would then certain copies would then get added into later editions. So the Babylonian Talmud has certain certain
marginalia.
Marginal information that was then added to the Venetian Talmud, which was the first printed one. So we're sort of inviting viewers to kind of utilize this space as well.
Very cool.
And that's where I think the catalog really became the central interpretation device for the exhibition. But even still, this it just requires a bit of kind of like sitting with before understanding exactly what's happening, as Megan mentioned before.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for your answers. Next, I would like to turn it over to Nick.
Hi, thank you. Everyone, I have to admit, I can't take credit for drafting this question, but I came across it in the preparation for today. I'm going to share an image that relates to the question. This is for Anthony and Shahar. I know it's kind of broad, but the question is in Clay's Angelus Novus, in Walter Benjamin's theses on the philosophy of history, the angel of history is moving forward in time, but with his head turned back to the past. He does not see the progress made through history looking forward, but rather all he sees is the trail of destruction and death that history leaves behind it. What does it say about archival work, about living archives, about looking at the past while moving towards the future? That's the kind of end of the drafted question there. And I know it's a big one, but I'm just curious, Anthony and Shahar.
It's from the questions we asked the artists for the catalog.
Yeah, if you could maybe just expand on that, why you chose to ask that specific question and why the Clay Angelus Novus.
I think archives are really strongly related to how we construct history. So the two are like best buddies in a way. I was wondering for the living archive, again, going back to this idea of archive as more like something that is related to death or like to past and to a grave and take out of light versus taken into light. This book by Walter Benjamin really stood out in the sense of maybe what we're trying to do is flip the angel, work with those that are like looking forward and not backwards, or just playing with this like idea of the angel of history. I mean, it's such a big thesis, and I don't really have like a one clear answer, just a really curious question about how is that can be possibly navigated with the art and with the works on display.
Yeah, well, thank you for that answer. And I think Raven has sort of maybe a follow-up of a bit broader version of that question. Raven, where are you? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Hi guys, hello. So my question was, again, it's not an original question, but it is something I'm curious about. I forgot which one of you, but one of you had spoken earlier about how you feel like the kitchen is a living archive. So I wanted to know a little bit more from the rest of you about what a living archive means to you guys.
Yeah, I think it would be good to maybe hear from, Mindy, Camilo, if you guys want to input there.
I wonder if a living archive is really trying to focus on this idea of growth and expansion. I feel like typically when we think of a corpus, which sounds or has the same root as a corpse, it feels like it's quite contained, right? And institutional archives do this, of course, but I think grassroots archives do this much more. By allowing it to live, you're allowing it to be accessible to specific groups. You're allowing it to grow and its collection to expand. You're allowing the different media types to expand. It's not so rigid in thinking about one type or another. And I think it also requires this collective understanding of care and how to preserve it over time. So it's not necessarily one person as like the primary stakeholder, but in fact a community that allows it to continue living and it evolving for future generations. But Camilo, I'm curious to hear what you think. Oh, sorry, Anthony.
No, I said I really like that. Yeah, the kind of collective care.
Yeah, Mindy, I really like what you just said, especially about this idea of the community having to maintain it. And I think what's interesting about like this idea of a living archive is that even though, as Shahar has mentioned before, initially archives may have this appearance of something dead or just like elements from the past. The interesting thing with archives is that they have to be brought to life with, like, normally the action of archivists or researchers is to bring these archives in general to life through their research process. And here I feel that the elements that the different works that Anthony and Shahar have put together really approach this archival practice from a different point of view and a very playful one. And I think this element of play, which is many times involved in artistic practice, is something that brings like archives to life. That's something I would comment through. So.
Yeah, I like that too.
Beautiful answers. Thank you both so much.
Thank you guys.
Well, it is our tradition to end our community events with a poetry reading, and I'm really thrilled to welcome Michael Cavuto to the stage today. Poet Michael Cavuto is currently living in Durham, North Carolina, having lived in New York City for the past 6 years. His first book, Country Poems, was published by Knife Fork Book Press in 2020, and he is a founding editor of the Slow Poetry in America newsletter and Oric Press, which you should all definitely check out. So Michael, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Carolyn. Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. I'm gonna actually turn my video off. Sorry to disembody myself. It's just a little easier on my connection. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This has been so wonderful. I'm a long time admirer of CBA and everything you do there, and worked and studied right around the corner for a number of years. And yeah, this also probably goes without saying for this crowd, but just the vital importance of book arts and small press for poetry here in the last 100 years is, you know, they're inextricable. I'm gonna read just 4 short poems to close our time together. I loved what Shahar said about the Talmud kind of being like an ocean of voices, and I think there was maybe even a Hebrew word that had this oceanic quality that she mentioned. These 4 poems are from a sequence in a manuscript that is also oceanic, involves a boat and a kind of mysterious sea story. Surround the word is an earful, and the ricochet lure is a skipping stone. Across lakey anatomy, a listener slips the surface and up underwatered muffled voices. Adrift the poem's rushing lilac, wind beam, and aural glare, pale sonic circles tinge the map of 2 ear-like cavities in the heart, dilated, shapy origin of every word. Subterfuge was a ship, day spun at rounds of arms, watch at mast height, let color drain, discolored primordial sea trap shore weeds, sapphire, dawn, green, grace, purple, skin bruised, sign of vines, wine red, passage, the sun drowned or submerged, kept, touched lips copper tinged and teeth flushed, urn crossing by narrow word, zealous pharmacology, whistle tender Bacchus was the fish. And then we were the ship, board by board, disembarked even. Our feet placed carefully, purposefully, one after the other. The movement overland was a mud bridge, the wind caught in canvas, hard rain that fell from our sides, through which we leaned in to find an angle to the earth. No longer any of us, we moved like tides, no matter where we were. Air inhaled into a crease of the Rome, we fold, star-dialed, endwise, still motion when stopped to rest, shored up we were carried on. Crewless vessel at breakneck west, gilly draft that won't let up, the ocean is sagging with fish. A merry bunch, the deck takes on water, belly laughing, boat fins and horsehair strings. They've brought their instruments, swim strong to the sound of this bit of land sinking. For a time, the story is a chance encounter, and it's the salt air that keeps them. Thank you, everyone.
Wow, thank you so much. That was really incredible to follow this rigorous and intimate, beautiful conversation. thank you, Shahar, Camilo, Mindy, Anthony, and Megan. We'd also really like to thank Karina from CBA for helping to make today possible. We encourage everyone to view our archive of the conversation on our YouTube channel. We will upload today's conversation there shortly. And please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation, Dark Reflections, Russell Craig, featuring Craig and Jessica Holmes. And we will conclude with a poetry reading by Dante Clark. And you can now please turn on your microphones and feel free to say hello, goodbye as you leave. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank you.
So, it was really nice
Thanks,
to meet
Megan.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Camilo. Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Shahar.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you all. Look forward to seeing the show. Bye-bye now.
Looking forward to meeting you all.
Keep up the
Likewise.
good work, you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you
Take
all.
care.
Okay, have a good one. Ciao.